Hello runners, I am Zaku and today I will present you a short preview of Dying Light, the board game. So let's put the leather clothes on, gear up, beware of the infected and enjoy the movie. Dying Light is a new board game from Glass Cannon Unplugged, based on the same titled video game made by Techland. In the game, players become runners, and cooperatively they need to fulfill scenario objectives in a post-apocalyptic city, full of zombie-like infected enemies and bandits. For the advantage, they will use gear, items and parkour to move through the three-dimensional city board. Speed and tempo will be crucial but dangerous, especially in the night time. In this video, you will learn the basics of the game, but first of all, I need to mention that everything you'll see here is a prototype and demo version of the game provided by a publisher, so take in mind that there could be some changes and more stuff and mechanics to come. You will find more information on Kickstarter campaign of Dying Light, the board game. So, that being said, let's focus on the game flow and setup. In the full game, you will play a series of campaigns, each consisting of several scenarios. Each will tell you its objectives and story through a scenario book and separate scenario deck. Our goal is to reach final objective before any runner will be eliminated or time ends. According to chosen scenario, we need to set up city boards, 3D buildings and obstacles, enemies and tokens. We also need to prepare cards with missions and goals to achieve, along with starting objective tokens. I will discuss other cards and tokens in a moment. Each player chooses a runner and takes player board, action dice, exposure deck, starting skill card and gear tokens. Whole game time is divided into rounds. From round to round, we will advance round marker on the round tracker, in the day or in the night phase. Each round consists of 3 phases, starting with the activation phase, moving on to the exposure phase, and finally to the end phase. At the activation phase, runners will activate and make actions. If it is a day, player choose activation order. At night, we will need to draw activation cards and check who will make their turn or resolve night activation ability of infected enemies. For most actions, player will spend dice and put them into action track, using the symbols to activate boosts. For example, for decreasing action costs or pushing enemies away. Rightmost die always become tempo die and indicates current tempo value. It can't be removed from the track. If our tempo reaches value of 4, we get momentum state, gaining momentum die for future activations. For some actions we can fatigue die, placing it on fatigue spot. It will be no longer available for next activation. Some actions like moving from zones with enemy or jumping generates risk. We're gonna roll risk dice and check consequences. First action we can make is run, other words, move action. We need to spend 1 die to move to adjacent zone in same or lower level. We need to check risk for each enemy in area we move from. Moving through walls and moving up is another action, climbing. We use climb action to move through obstacles like walls, using 2 dice, or 1 die plus 1 additional die for every level of building we are climbing on. Every climb boost presented on die used for this action decreases this cost by 1. Next action is jump. We can make move from one building to another on the same level in 2 zones away, or we can jump from building to lower level 2 zones away, avoiding walls and enemies in between. Cost of this action is 2 action dice, but we can decrease it by using dice with jump boost. Every jump generates 1 risk plus 1 risk per enemy on the zone we jump from. Another action is combat action. We can attack our enemies. We need to spend 1 die for standard attack on our weapon card or fatigue 1 extra die to make a special attack instead. We roll combat dice presented on weapon card. If we got same or higher hits than enemy's toughness, we eliminate them. Crits eliminates weaker enemies in one shot. Other actions are use and utility. We will use our items from inventory and interact with features presented on the board, like picking loot, using jump pads or throwing spears. This action do not require spending dice, but generates risk in some cases, like in zones with enemies. So, when you know all the action we can make, let's talk about risk. When our action generates risk, we need to roll risk dice equal to the risk value, decreased by the evade boost on used dice. After roll, depending on the symbols on the dice, we need to take wounds, spawn enemies, fatigue more dice or get exposure token, which can even trigger chases. While making actions, runners can use their abilities to make them better, even more with momentum state. They can also use their gear to boost actions while spending momentum die or to prevent negative consequences. After activation of each runner, we need to process to exposure phase. In this phase, enemies will make their movements and attacks. Players check the exposure value, shown above the actual tempo, adding exposure from exposure tokens or other effects. From runners with the highest exposure, each player will draw exposure cards in the number of the exposure value. On those cards we will find few symbols of enemies' actions we need to make, depending on day or night phase. New enemies will spawn on nests, then they will move into adjacent runners and in the end they will attack. While progressing the game, more difficult enemies will show up on the board. When enemies attack, we need to check their attack values and our defense. We also need to make a roll and check extra damage. More enemies means higher chance to make it happen. In that phase, runners can use their unused dice to prevent damage, even fatigue dice to prevent more damage, and use defense boosts. Taking wounds come with drawing wound cards. For first wound, players take 1 card faced down. It is a light wound. Second wound is flipping light wound faced up, applying negative effects. It becomes heavy wound. Third wound is a new light wound and so on. Runners taking 4th heavy wound are eliminated. After exposure phase, we process to the end phase. Knocked down enemies will stand up and all runners with tempo 3 or less will have to lose their momentum and momentum die. We also advance round marker, sometimes executing events or day-night transition. Remember that in the night rounds, from round 8, we cannot activate runners in any order. More difficult enemies like howlers will spawn, enemies will have special activation in the activation phase, and effects on the exposure cards will be more painful to us. After that, we can reshuffle activation deck and process to the next round. But what is need to be done to fulfill the scenario goal? Well, we don't know in the beginning. Every scenario is based on a few cards in a scenario book, with side quests we can make, like interacting with NPCs and make missions. After completing objectives, we will find out what is need to be done next. Consequences of our choices could influence on few factions in the city. What you achieve in scenarios, including character development and game world development, may transfer and influence gameplay of other scenarios and campaign in the future. And this is how you play Dying Light in the basics. Of course, there will be more content, more mechanics, more enemies and more city to explore on 16 tiles in different layout combinations. Just follow campaign page, and if you like this project, share it and back the game. All necessary links will be in description of this video. That was all from me today. Thank you for being here and see you in the next movie.